So thanks everybody for jumping on. Most everybody, just looking through the names, most everybody's been involved in the project in one capacity or another. Just to kind of summarize, where we are as part of the Morehouse Family Forest Initiative that started back in August 2018 is when that grant officially started. Multiple partners came together. Many of the partners on the call came together to say, that we wanted to see more active forest management in this region, that region being Southeast Arkansas and Northeast Louisiana. So the main premise behind the project was trying to conduct outreach to get interested landowners in touch with either a forester or wildlife biologist or other appropriate contact to make sure that they're getting any information and management assistance to meet their objectives. So that's the whole premise behind the project. A lot of that resulted in direct mail outs, other outreach. We've had billboards, radio advertisements, in-person workshops, online workshops due to COVID, any form of outreach, just about we've done it. But the backbone of this project has really been those postcards that were mailed out, and several series of postcards, and there's actually still some going out over the next couple of months. So that's kind of a broad, real quick overview of what the project is, but a very significant part of that is this survey that Jared's going to be talking to us about here in a few minutes, as well as others. So thank all of you for your work on the survey. Hoping that we can really get some good information out of that, and maybe we can learn some things going forward about how to use this information to figure out how to best address and best promote conservation activities in this region. I'd say this is really a great time to have this discussion, as we have a new program coming out, a regional conservation partnership program in this landscape, and a few new parishes and counties as well. So it covers 8 counties in southern Arkansas and 8 parishes in northern Louisiana. And that project is going to be geared towards seeing more active forest management hit the ground, getting more open pine stands promoting prescribed fire, active thinning, TSI, chemical treatments as appropriate, fire breaks, those types of things. So any information that we can glean from the results of this survey to help direct outreach going forward, especially in that program or in that project, would be really helpful. So with that, Jared, you can take it away.
Very good. Thanks, Austin. All right, so thanks everyone for being here today. Really appreciate your time. A couple of important things to know. Again, so my name and Sapna's name is on here, but we're not the only ones who worked on this. 2 other really important names that are here are Mike Blazer and Austin, or sorry, not Austin, Ana Gutierrez. Ana has just recently departed LSU, where she was working very heavily on forestry-related projects, and moved up north. There's other students who are involved with this in terms of, as you'll see here in a minute, there was a lot of legwork that went into launching this survey. A couple of other important things to know is that, I'm not a historically trained forester. I'm an economist that does a lot of survey work, and so when I do sort of the background knowledge related to forestry and sort of big take-home messages or implications, I'm going to lean more heavily on the forestry results are valuable to moving forward. Of course, I can talk about process and why we did certain things and provide more detail. A couple of other important things to know is this is being recorded, so if you want to watch later, you can. I can share the slides later. And then the other really important thing to know is that I'm going to try to leave as much time for questions throughout and towards the end, and to say that this is in some ways preliminary. Going back to that idea of what are the important implications, I really think that your input could be useful here. And what I mean by that is that we are going to list question numbers. I'll quickly jump ahead to that here. And basically, if you think that there are dots that you would like us to connect, meaning that like if you want to see how demographics are related to forest landowners' future plans, we can, Sapna is ready. She's got the data open, and we can sort of try to produce some basic summary tables real time, or we can follow up with that with you later, so we can basically delve into the potential connections and associations that you think are maybe important. Okay, so my point here is that if you see things that you want to see those dots connected, we can run those analyses here real time and try to put those up on the screen for you. Okay, so again, this is the LSU survey. It was a little bit different, I think, than a lot of the other outreach that's been taking place as part of the project. You know, we took a very sort of academic, rigorous approach with this. And what that means is that we used the Dillman method. So those of you who are familiar, that means that we're sending out many waves of mail, physical mail, to the forest landowners. We were looking at 4 Louisiana parishes and 4 Arkansas counties in the Morehouse region. And then we used address-based sampling. So using tax records, we were able to basically glean all the forest landowners in the area. And the sample of forest landowners that we, I should say the population that we sent the survey to was about 4,500 landowners. 3,500 of them were in Louisiana and about 1,000 in Arkansas. And you're going to see that a big chunk of that were all in Union Parish, Louisiana. Okay, we really fixed that to be those who had reported acreage of between 10 and 600 acres, because some of the literature suggests that adoption is lower among low acreage owners. But again, one of the key things to know is that it's 4,500 landowners that we surveyed, and we sent them each 5 pieces of mail. So it's very sort of labor intensive effort. Some of this we outsourced, but some of it was just a matter of recruiting as many undergrads and grad students with pizza and beer as possible to get this thing out the door. Okay. A few other important things to know about the survey is that we did have several rounds of interviews and focus groups with folks from LFA, AFA, private consultants, other public agents that basically really doing our best to make sure that we're honing in on the important questions and getting the language right. We also followed closely as needed with the National Woodland Owners Survey, so NWOS, all that a fair amount. The survey itself was run from March to May 2021, so earlier this year. Okay, again with 5 waves where you have a pre-notification survey. You have the first wave, and the first wave it was online invitation, and then the second wave was a reminder postcard. First wave was pre-notification. Second wave was survey, 3rd wave is postcards, 4th wave was survey again, and 5th wave was a reminder postcard. So just a very labor-intensive effort. Okay. Okay. Oh, I had all that on the next slide. How about that? I should pay attention to my my presenter view a little bit more often. Yeah, follows NWOS. So of the 4,500 folks that we sent surveys to, we had about 578 responses. Again, a majority of them were from Louisiana, and a smaller group was from Arkansas. An effective response rate of about 13%. In the way of survey response rates these days, I don't think it's bad. I think it could have been higher, but for being a cold call, I thought it's pretty reasonable for a cold call. In terms of the sample that we're analyzing today, we're going to trim it a little bit based on those who had sort of very severe non-response or sort of key variables that they didn't respond to. Okay, so a little bit more about our population. So this is the breakdown of the forest landowners in our counties and parishes. And so what you're seeing here is that, okay, about 3/4 of the forest landowners in our target area were from Louisiana, and about 1/4 were from Arkansas. So if you instead look at the number of respondents that we received per county and per parish, it's actually a fairly reasonable participation rate across the different groups. So meaning that, okay, we had 116 responses from Arkansas, but that's about 20% of our sample, which corresponds to about what you would expect in the population. Same thing on the Louisiana side, that we see that, okay, Union Parish, it was a very, very large chunk of our sample, of our population that we were studying, and that we correspondingly had a very high participation rate from that group. So it's such that the response pattern reasonably matches the population. Okay, so having a lot more Louisiana respondents and having more Union Parish respondents isn't something that we're surprised by. Okay. All right. So now we're going to jump into the results. And again, I'm going to try to move along quickly and hopefully inspire some ideas where I'll probably talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then Sapna's got another 10 minutes or so. So we're going to really try to leave a lot of time for questions and additional discussion. So again, here's a preview of some of the questions we're going to look at. So we've got demographics, property characteristics, ownership reasons, future plans, conservation practices, certification, cost share, outreach, and then this section we're going to call willingness to pay, which is something that Sapna will talk a fair amount about. One other thing I'd like to quickly plug is that for this section here, outreach, Anna was a big part of a paper that we just recently got submitted. So we'll see where that goes, but it was nice to get something out the door before she also went out the door. Okay, so demographics, about 3/4 of the sample were male, and a high percentage of the sample were from age 65 to 74. Looking at the NWAS sample, National Woodland Owners Survey, this is, especially as it relates to age, this is actually fairly reasonable. When I was looking at the Louisiana breakdown of ages, they also showcase a higher proportion of respondents who are in this age bracket. We have a few more male respondents compared to NWAS. So if I remember correctly, it's about 35% female in the NWAS sample. Education, pretty much on par with the Louisiana NWAS sample. That tends to be a fairly highly educated group. And with income, I don't recall. But the takeaway here is that the sample, it's reflective in terms of where these people living and some of the characteristics that we typically use as a benchmark for representation of the larger population. Okay, property size. Again, we were largely focused on those who, based on tax records, had acreage between 10 and 600 as a target audience. And we see that the majority of our respondents had between 50 and 250 acres. So if we're thinking about sort of conservation outreach, do we know the amount of land as a percentage of total? Okay, so Sapna, make sure you're kind of keeping an eye on the chat. And Doug, if just kind of keep an eye out, Sapna might ask a follow-up question to just make sure that she knows how she may need to run an analysis. Okay. So we see that the majority of our respondents have between 50 and 250 acres. We have some folks who have, a lot more. We see that there are folks out there who have someone out there who had 10,000 acres, but as few as two acres. The folks who are participating from Arkansas, they generally had more acreage per person than the folks in Louisiana. Okay. We asked about how long they had owned the land themselves versus how long the land had been in their family. We see that it had been in their family for quite a long time, but for personal ownership, about 23 years. Okay. In terms of where these forest landowners are living relative to their land, we see that about 1/4 of the sample lives very, very either on or very close to the property, forest property. So that the less than 1 means either on site or less than 1 mile. Okay, we see about another 1/4 of the sample is living within 25 miles or so of the forest land. But then, we've got another quarter of the sample that are living over 250 miles away. So absentee land ownership is a very important component of the folks who are making forest management decisions. Okay, and that's something we've been looking at a lot with some of this other outreach work in terms of how do we effectively work with folks who have less chance to be connected with their land, and how interested are they in being connected with their land. Okay, so another one of our questions was the reasons for owning forest or owning their forest land. In descending order, we asked it as a Likert style question, 1 being not at all important, 5 being extremely important. We're only showing you the percent percent that's selected extremely important. Okay, so in descending order, we see that family legacy, half of the respondents chose extremely important. Okay, and if you would have included very important, you would see another very, very sizable chunk. But this still does a reasonably good job of telling us what the priorities are of the landowners, just using extremely important relative to the other categories. Interestingly, though, we see that supporting wildlife habitat is second highest, so significantly lower than family legacy, but still a third of the sample is interested in wildlife habitat. And a very close equivalent level is timber production and privacy. These are all essentially equivalent in terms of their importance. And then sort of, we'll call this next class of hunting, being in nature, investment property, forest restoration. These are all in the 20s. Okay, to a lesser degree, recreation, raising families. These are less important activities. And again, this sort of, if you're thinking about the fact that lots of these folks are living further away, this doesn't seem to be unreasonable. Okay, so family legacy, very important, but there are other important categories that we know are meaningful to these folks. So their plans for their forest land in their next 5 years, the overwhelming majority of folks are thinking about keeping their forest land in its entirety. So 85% say they want to keep all of it for the next 5 years. There are a very, very small number who are interested in selling either some or all of their forest land, and usually an equivalent amount who are even interested in gifting some of their land. Okay, another focus of our survey was on conservation practices. Which ones had they adopted was this in the past? I can't recall. And was this in the past 5 years or ever?
5 years.
Past 5 years, okay. We see that, and these aren't mutually exclusive, so a person can participate in several activities. But about a third of the sample have done some sort of harvesting or thinning in the past 5 years. Replanting and done by about another fifth. I think for some, they might, depending on how you interpret it, some might be pleased that they met with a forester. A fifth have met with a forester in the past 5 years, because based on some of the literature I've read, 20% is better than what I've seen in some of the literature. On the other hand, I think given our goals for this project, we would like to see that number move upwards. Management plan, about a tenth of folks have that. And then a minority of folks have some of these other activities like watershed restoration, prescribed fire, etc. But one important thing to take away from this is that over half of respondents have adopted at least one practice. So there is some there's evidence that folks are participating in these activities. Okay, certification. Okay, so again, probably not to anyone's surprise, the vast majority of our forest landowners are not participating in any of the forest certification programs. We see that ATFS, of the three major programs that we asked about, ATFS had the highest participation. but still, it's a very, very low percentage of folks. We do have, I believe, later on, we have a follow-up for why they weren't interested. And I can't remember the results of that off the top of my head, but we'll show that here in a few more minutes for why folks weren't that interested in being weren't interested in certification. Again, cost shares. Why are folks participating in cost share programs? Again, it's not as there's more success and more participation in cost share relative to certification. We see about a quarter of people are participating in cost shares, whereas only 6, 7, 8% of folks were participating in certification programs. The cost share programs that they are tending to participate in the most are the state programs, but that varies. So we see that it's about twice as large in Louisiana that people are participating in Louisiana's cost share program versus in Arkansas, it's only about 5%. A lot of people can't tell you which agency they're participating, they're working with in terms of a cost share. So yeah, this is just sort of a, I guess a sense for which programs people are participating in. Okay, so getting into information, where they've gotten it from and where they want to get it from or what they want. We asked folks, okay, where have you tried to get information about managing your forest? And we see that there are some who have received forest information recently. About 20% have received some sort of forest information source in the 20% in the past year. But the real takeaway message here is that there's half of our forest landowners who have never had any information about forest management. And given how many postcards we're sending out, again, I'm not sure like what maybe there's because they're not interested. That's why they're ignoring the postcards. But it seems like there's this number jumped out at me. Okay, where are they getting that information from? If they are for the people who had received some past information, where are they getting that information from? Okay, that's what this set of results is here. We see that about a quarter of the folks who have received information in the past are receiving that information from a private forester. A tenth are receiving it from a state employee, university employee, about another 7%. Folks are talking with their friends and other landowners, but still, that's only about 11%. We see that a big chunk of our folks are working with private consultants as their main source for how to manage their forest. Though, if you collectively combine some of the public sources, so state, university, LFA, AFA, it's not, we're creeping up to what, 20% between these three right here. So we definitely have an important impact on reaching the landowners. How have they received this information? What's the format that they've received this information? If we look at the format of the past information, we've got on-site visits, printed materials, workshops, conferences, web pages, emails, etc. Kudos to Arkansas because a lot of their forest landowners who have received past information, a lot of on-site visits. Like that's a pretty impressive stat to me. 38% have received information from on-site visits. Louisiana, about 14%. Printed materials, a very prolific source of information. Again, we did that as part of our survey. In each survey, they received an ATFS brochure, the national ATFS brochure, a state-specific brochure. We had the video that was made as part of this project that was embedded in the beginning of the survey in the online version. So we, as much as possible, we tried to give them good information. What you're seeing over here, though, is how folks want to receive the format that they want to receive information in the future. So again, what you're seeing here is that there is a big role for our state, university, again, sort of local partners to be a useful and desirable information source for a lot of our landowners. Yes, sure, they want to meet with the consultants, but they also want, they value your opinion. They value, of course, more printed materials. How effective that is a separate matter, but yeah, we have to stick with our bread and butter of giving them some printed material, sending them emails, etc. Okay, information topics that they've received in the past and what they're interested in the future. I think there's a pretty, to me, there's an important need here, because we see that whereas wildlife management, a quarter of the people have received, in the past, they have received information about wildlife management. 3/5 of the sample want information about wildlife management, right? So where in other categories, so for example, in timber management and timber sales, yes, they have received a lot of information, and they also, a lot of folks want this information, but a lot of folks have also received this information. So the difference between these two is smaller than the difference between past information received on wildlife versus future desirability of it. So to me, again, that's sort of a take-home message for me, is we've got work to do there to make sure that we're really getting more of that, making that, providing more opportunities in that space. Again, we see that the demand is there on the timber side, and the demand is there on the wildlife management side, but it doesn't seem to be coming across as well in the minds of the landowners. I would also say that if you look at almost all of these categories, the percent of folks who have received this information in the past versus the group who want more on this information in the future, all of these are larger, and most statistically so. They, double want to see more information on invasive species, more than double want to know more about intergenerational transfer of land, knowing more about diseases, knowing more about the conservation easement programs and the certification programs, right? There's still a lot of opportunity there among the folks who want that information, sort of, again, showcasing to us that the demand for our services is there. Okay, something else that I know Austin had talked about, and I know others would be interested in, is basically, again, connecting some of these dots between the various sort of important variables, like, how often what practices are they participating in, who's participating in certification, who's participating in cost share. So what are some of the connections between some of these observable characteristics and participation in some of these other programs? And so Sapna had done some regressions, basically trying to understand which characteristics are associated with participation. So what you're looking at here is conservation practice. We did some logits and some discrete choice models where basically 1 is if they had participated in any conservation practice, and 0 means that they had not participated in any conservation practice. So again, a 1 just means that they participated in any of the conservation practices, not a specific one. Okay. And what you can see here is that among the demographic variables, gender, age, education, and income, none of those things are predicting whether or not they had participated in at least one conservation practice. But what we do see is that property size is significant and positive, which is, I think most of us would expect that. The larger your property size, the more likely you are to either, again, to participate in timber management or to participate in some other sort of conservation practice. We also found that the further away the respondent was from their forest land, the more likely they were to participate in a conservation practice. This one, I was more surprised by, and I think, is the literature, and again, this is where I would call in Anna, is like, has the literature previously suggested that more distant landowners are more likely to participate in conservation practices? I would guess no. I think that's knowing from the literature we've seen, that one of the big challenges is getting those distant forest landowners to participate in a forest management plan, to meet with a consultant, is a bigger challenge. For this next variable, this is one means that they had participated in any of the 3 certification programs. So ATFS, SFI, and the next one is cost share. One means that they participated in any of the cost share. So whether that's FSA, the state programs, NRCS, et cetera. And for both of these, again, we see a very similar story, which is that the demographics don't predict whether or not they're participating in certification or participating in the cost share programs. It's property size. The larger the more land they own, the more likely they are to participate in these programs. But distance was not an important variable in these 2 cases. As a bit of a preview for what Sapna is going to talk about, we were also interested in, we wanted to know which variables predicted their interest in meeting with private consultants, foresters, and meeting with public foresters. So like, again, a university or state employee. For those who are interested in private, older landowners were less interested in meeting with private consultants, but larger landowners were. On the other hand, for public consultants, we see that there is more going on with the demographics. So males are more likely to want to meet with a public consultant. Younger folks are more willing to meet with a public consultant, and more higher income individuals are more willing to meet with public consultants. But in this case, property size didn't matter. And I think that's, again, it's interesting in that, you know, from the public side, we're usually trying to promote forest health, and the interest on economic returns to the private landowner, you know, it's not, oftentimes it's not what our primary objective is as a public servant. So I guess to me, the fact that this isn't significant is useful for folks in the public space. Anna, did you have a question?
Yes, no, just to comment about the distance and absentee, like being more like willing to adopt conservation practices. That might be, I mean, yes, the literature says that they are less active, but they are more likely to be enrolled in conservation programs. So there might be a connection between their adoption of conservation practices if they are enrolled in conservation programs.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so for that, I'm going to let Sapna go ahead and describe a little bit of her research that she's been working on with these consultations. And yeah, go ahead, Sapna.
So I can start from this slide, or I have to share my one?
Just go ahead and I'll move the slides forward.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Hello everyone. I'm Sapna. I'm a PhD student in LSU, and I'm working with Dr. Payne and this project. So today I'm going to explain what I'm going to do in my dissertation related to this project. So the family forest landowners occupies the significant portion of the land in the significant portion of forest land in the US. And there are several forest certification programs, but the adoption of the certification program among these landowners is low. And the most important reason is because these certification programs are, they require forest management plan, but landowners are unfamiliar and they have lack of knowledge on these kinds of forest management plan. So one way how we can remove these barriers is the landowners can use the expertise of public and private forest owners. And my research is mostly related with their participation for the consultation with the private foresters. So the one important thing is for a private consultation, they have to pay some fee. So one challenge is what is their willingness to pay for such consultation. So if they have higher willingness to pay, then they are more likely to participate in the consultation. And if low, then they are less likely to participate in the consultations. So, if we want to enroll more and more landowners in the consultation, then we can provide them some kind of information. For example, we can provide them the informations on the benefits of forest consultation, or also we can, Jared, can you please switch to the, okay, so can you switch to the another slide? So we can provide them different kind of information. For example, we can provide the informations on what are the financial incentives or financial benefits of enroll with the private forester. Or the another way is we can give them the informations on like other people in the other county of their state. They have very high rate of certification, so they are likely to follow them. So they will start consulting, or that increase their interest for the consultation. But in our case, how we going to estimate the willingness to pay is we are going to ask them a hypothetical questions like what is their willingness to pay for the consultation. Can you go to the previous slide? So here, so I put how we ask the questions for estimating the willingness to pay, and they circle one of the amount if they're willing to pay something, or if they don't want to pay anything, then they circle, okay, I'm not interested to pay. So we ask them questions in the hypothetical scenario. That means there may be hypothetical bias, which means when that is the difference economic value in hypothetical and real scenario. Because if you ask in the hypothetical condition, they may say, okay, I'm willing to pay $200, but if there is a real scenario, they have to pay for the consultation, they either may have less than their willingness to pay either may have less than 200, or they may not be interested to pay at all. So there may be the problem of hypothetical bias. So when we use the informations, then that informations may increase the willingness to pay, but that may not be equal in hypothetical and the real. For example, if there may be likely that our information increase the willingness to pay by 100 in the hypothetical, but just $50 increase in willingness to pay in real, or there may not be increase of the willingness to pay at all. So I'm going to examine if there exists the hypothetical bias in information treatment.
So I'm going to just quickly follow up to give a little bit of additional. Okay, so our goal here is getting folks interested in conservation. And so if you see, if you've seen in other literatures, we're trying to basically get more people to do the right thing. So if you think about getting people to use less water or less electricity or whatever the socially desirable outcome is, okay? And so in those outcomes, they might use what's called social norms. So if I say to you that your neighbor is using half as much water as you are, there's a fair amount of literature that's found that when you make these comparisons, people will do the right thing more often, okay? And so what we're trying to use with this social norms intervention over here on the left is like, if we're telling the folks in the Morehouse family region, like, look, not very many of you are participating in ATFS or in any of the conservation programs, maybe that will be the subtle amount of encouragement that it will take to get them to be more interested in better stewards. Going to Sapna's challenge, though, is that if we give them this information and it's just a survey question, people might say, okay, like I see that I'm not particularly good compared to my neighbors. Well, it's easy for me to say I'm willing to pay more, but are they really willing to pay more if it was a real scenario? So Sapna, just go ahead and give them a brief synopsis in the next 2 minutes or so that way we can save 15 minutes for questions.
Mm-hmm. So can you, yes. So this is the table that shows the hypothetical bias. So here we see that 155 landowners they have their mean willingness to pay in real is 0, but their mean willingness to pay in hypothetical questions is about 30. Similarly, like in we see here that 9 people they have real willingness to pay 50, hypo willingness to pay 77. So in each for each group of people, we see that their mean real willingness to pay is less, and their like most of the cases we see that their real willingness to pay more than their mean hypothetical willingness to pay. So this is what we call hypothetical bias. So can you go to the, so yeah, and now we, this table shows treatment-wise hypothetical bias. So when there is control, there is no, when we don't provide any informations, then still the real willingness to pay is less than the hypothetical willingness to pay. And the hypothetical bias, it is difference between hypothetical willingness to pay and real willingness to pay, which is 24. And in case of social norms and financial incentive also, we see that the real willingness to pay is less, but the hypothetical willingness to pay is higher. So here we see that we see hypothetical bias in control as well as in the these information treatment, but we see that the hypothetical bias is slightly higher in case of information treatment. This from the regression, this is just from the descriptive stat. So in our later analysis, we will do running the regressions. So we should be aware when we use the different kind of information for encouraging such good works. So this is the message from this study.
Yeah. Again, just to quickly follow up, we're telling you that if you use social norms, people to make the right choice often. You're looking here, okay, yes, the willingness to pay, so the preference for getting a consultation for a certification as a step toward certification, it increases when we give them that social norm information. It increases both in a hypothetical elicitation and in a real elicitation. So the takeaway there is that it seems to be working. Okay, giving them more financial information didn't seem to work, but giving them more, telling them about their neighbors did seem to work. Okay, last quick thing I wanted to say is, because I know we had it here, is here are some of the reasons for why folks weren't interested in certification. They don't know who to contact. It's just not important to them. They don't have time, multiple reasons. And then for a majority of them, they didn't answer this question. And that's, I think, all I wanted to, all the stuff that I had prepared. So at this point, again, we've got 15 minutes, and I'm very happy to take more time afterwards if you've got individual questions. Wanted to open it up for the audience to ask additional questions, and maybe we can give you some, again, extra. We're happy to do more analysis on behalf of your specific questions. So Shannon's message is about when will this recording be available? Will it be sent through email? Yes, I can. I'm going to make the slides and the link to the recording. I'll send that to everyone that's on that big email list here later this afternoon.
Thanks for the presentation. I had a quick question. Was there a question on the survey that kind of asked people if they knew that there was free assistance available for planning as well? Because we still run into a lot of folks that even think that, say, even when they visit with NRCS, that it's going to cost them, right? So was there a question related to that as opposed to the idea that, how much would they be willing to pay?
So we didn't ask them if they were previously aware of, basically public programs, but we did ask them, are you interested in meeting with a public forester? And we said that was free. We put a table up that sort of showcased, okay, here are the services and the outcomes that you can expect to work with a public forester versus what you would expect with some of the goals that you're trying to achieve when you're using a private one. And the interest in public was only was higher, but not much higher than it was for private. Is that right? Okay, maybe I'm going to retract that last statement. The closest question that we had to that, Ryan, was, are you interested in meeting with a public consultant and it doesn't cost us that?
Okay, thank you.
Sapna, you might be able to run, that might be an easy one for you to run right now.
Jared, this is John McAlpine. One of the things that I got looking at when you're, objectives of owning the forest, when you're talking about legacy and then timber production and wildlife and those things, and a lot of those, I would say, are not mutually exclusive. It can be a legacy, it can be for timber management, and it can also be for wildlife habitat, all. And I know they kind of put them in importance, but a lot of those are not mutually exclusive. And I know of all the landowners I've met over the last 20 or 25 years, wildlife may always be on the table, but in a lot of ways, wildlife doesn't pay for, you don't make any money for the wildlife. You get recreations and other collateral benefits. It seems like more of them are, even though they may say it's not about the money, it always comes down to, it's always about the money, and getting the revenue. And I think a lot of it is selling active forest management as good wildlife habitat too. And I think Ryan and Austin will agree with me on this, of continuing to stir that pot, to have activity going on in the woods, whether it be spraying or burning or harvesting or thinning or those things, continually on that. And I think that's the story that kind of has to be told, is you can have your cake and eat it too. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, everything you said, I agree with. And I think that some of the data that we have point to that. Like if you look here, like the most important activities to the forest landowners in terms of future information are timber management, timber sales. And so like that idea that the money matters is there. And they have demonstrated that's important to them in the past. And what you're getting at is that, okay, like there is this, and again, I think our data support that this opportunity here is that like they want to get more of those ancillary. Was it John? Did I answer your question, John?
Yeah, and I think some of it, even on the private side or the consultant side or on the public side, is still a limited amount of resources that are available to be able to meet with landowners and to be able to deliver that. I think Matt and Dr. Blaze are on there, and I think some of that goes back to just we're retiring more foresters than we're graduating, and we're short on some of that expertise out there to do that.
Okay, we have a question here from Matt. All right, in your data, I don't think we asked a question about the number of generations. And the second part of, are they following a current generation's objectives, or have they sort of carved out their own objectives for the land? How likely would, I don't know. What, Sapna and Anna, do any questions jump out to you that?
Yeah, Jared, I guess I was saying, that's not a criticism. I'm curious or I think maybe in future surveys, it'd be interesting. We know that, somewhere around 10% of the people have plans. But even in terms of informal, what's the likelihood of, for a landowner of, their children or even their spouse, particularly since their spouse, if it's a male owner, the wife is probably going to inherit the property. How likely is it that there's going to be any continuity in the management plan? Because I think not only having a management plan, I think that's a first step, but ensuring its continuity to a certain degree, since if I'm only going to land for 23 years, I'm going to work with John and develop a management plan, but that management plan is probably going to look beyond that, or look for future conditions that are going to extend beyond my lifetime. So I'd hope that I could get my son or daughter or my wife to kind of follow in that legacy. So there's some continuity. I think that'd just be an interesting thing that I haven't seen done, an inquiry done much on. Yeah. So that was basically where I was at.
Yeah. No, I think. Go ahead, Emma.
No, sorry. We didn't ask about the plan, like management plan, but we did ask like if they intended to pass the land to their children or to sell the land, like how likely they were to sell, like once they inherited the land, how likely they were to sell the land. That's the question we did ask, but not about management.
And I will say, and again, I think this is conversations that I had with Mike, just sort of that handoff to the so our best guess in terms of non-response bias was kind of comparing it to the in-house outcomes. Do you remember like things were significantly different based on the Woodlands owner survey? We used a couple of other checks. So in terms, another way to proxy for non-response is basically are the types of respondents who are participating at the beginning of survey collection, are they different than the folks who are responding at the end? So if we think that there's some sort of response bias, maybe really eager people take the survey in the first 2 weeks and the laggards are taking it in the last 2 weeks. That's sort of an indication of is there a difference in the preference intensity of people taking it? And if I recall correctly, we didn't have anything significant related to we'll call it avidity to take the survey. Is that right?
No, actually we did. I think we did find that those who did not answer, they had more acres than those that did.
Okay. That's why I'm here, to make sure that I don't say anything too radically wrong.
Yes, that's correct. Those they had bigger forests than those that did answer.
Okay. Moving forward in terms of getting a representative outcome, like we would really need to reweigh the sample based on to kind of correct for those mismatches in the population versus our sample. But that's not something we've done yet.
Hey, Jared, while we're on this slide, sitting here thinking about it, in that the difference in the wildlife management, those that have had information and want future information, and kind of going back to John's point earlier, about integrating that with forest management, just got me thinking, could we define, I guess, what types of landowners want that wildlife management component? And to see if that is different than the average landowner out there.
Yeah.
For just that wildlife management aspect.
Certainly. So, where we have these regression results here that are based on, okay, what characteristics predict interest in any conservation practice? Well, we can certainly do that analysis to say, okay, who are the people that are expressing interest in wildlife management? Which characteristics are associated with that? That's definitely an easy analysis for us to do.
Okay. I think that'd be really potentially helpful for future outreach efforts, to know if we need to tailor it a certain way for for each of those management actions.
Yeah, and that was something we had explored again in this other paper that Anna and Mike and I worked on, where we were looking at, okay, how do these, for all these absentee landowners, how do we reach out to those folks? How do we, another big question that we were looking at was, does the format matter? Are basically people, Zoom style meetings with the landowners, is that something they're interested in, especially for like absentee landowners? So understanding the characteristics of the people who want certain information or certain formats is, I can see how that's really useful.
Jared, I was curious about this finding that the larger distance and larger land holding are both have predictive, both positively related to adoption of or conducting a conservation practice. Do those two things possibly share explanatory power since both are significant? In other words, I'm thinking about, like we have some alluvial part of this region here, and there are quite a lot of landowners that may reside in Houston that have a large tract of land in the Mississippi area here that in WRP, and the interest there is in hunting. I just wondered if we're kind of picking up on those kind of landowners with those two things combined or something.
Yeah, so I'd say one, we can basically do an interaction of property size and distance. And if that's positively related, that certainly supports that idea. And then the other piece that you're getting at is, instead of using this sort of very blunt, have they done any conservation practices? Let's be more nuanced. Let's see which conservation practices they're interested in, which, for maybe for that type of person that you're describing, let's say they're a doctor who lives 3 hours away. Maybe the timber income isn't as important to them. So for that person, they may have selected wildlife management is important and timber related information is less important. And so sort of picking out who is our target, who do we think is a likely candidate for being open to this information, and what do we need to sort of, what's the best way to reach them?
Surprised to find out there were more non-respondents with large land than what responded there. I would have thought they would have been the opposite of that.
The only thing I would say there is that we did have that incentive to get folks to participate, but it really, I don't think.
No, sorry, I said the other way around. It's the ones who responded, they have more forests than the ones that did not respond. Sorry, yeah.
Good. Well,
I put it in the chat to correct myself.
Oh, okay. Well, the world makes sense again. Thank you. Okay.
Well, it is 2 o'clock. So I'll have here for a little bit to answer any other questions, but I really appreciate everyone's time today. Again, I'm happy to share any additional results or answer any additional questions. Again, I want to help the folks on our project, to reach the forest landowners more successfully and getting them to, basically adopt more conservation practices in our forest. Just let me know how I can help you. Thank you again, Sapna, for presenting.